Hi everyone, good morning. It's a Wednesday. Wednesday's not my usual day for streaming, but I appreciate that you're spending some time with me today. Today's a very special edition of my usual streams. I'm going to be doing my first ever data science class. I started this by doing 10 minutes on Instagram, and as I told Instagram, I never want to do pre-recorded content. I think for me, that's really boring to put together. And I think for you guys, it might be a little bit boring to consume also. So I want to do these as live courses. I want to do these as live streams. I'm not saying that there's going to be a regular schedule to them. It's just whenever it makes sense to share something out, to kind of pass some knowledge along is when I want to put on these classes. So I want to thank all of you for joining me, for being part of this. I have a couple people that are still on my Instagram feed over here. Please feel free to switch over to the YouTube feed where the primary class is going to be. And I'm doing it on YouTube primarily because I do anticipate that this is going to take a while. I'm prepared to go here as long as we need to, kind of walk you through all of the different steps. I have the chat live and ready to go. So feel free to contribute in the chat. I already see a couple of people in there. But, I'm just kind of here to share some ideas, share some thoughts that I have. I'm going to be sharing from my own personal experience, how I made the transition into data science, the different approaches and challenges that I used. Hopefully, you'll have questions from that. So feel free to stop me at any time and, put a question in the chat or something's not clear. I'm happy to help as much as I can. I'm also going to have, things that I'm going to put up on the screen. And I'm also going to help us take some notes along the way. So that way, I will have a little bit of a record of what happened and, kind of be able to have some materials to go along with the recording. So again, thank you so much for being here. And let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and shut off my Instagram feed over on this side. That way I can put that away and put that down. Okay, so one of the great benefits of starting up these social media accounts and kind of doing this whole process is that it's been able to enable me to talk to a lot of you. I get a lot of messages. I really enjoy doing the live streams. A lot of people join those, and I'm able to collect some of these common themes that all of you are kind of concerned with or have questions on, or different things that are kind of going on in the industry, right? So one of the questions, really it's the same question, two questions in one, that a lot of you approach me with is, well, can you give me a project idea? What's a good project idea? How do I add to my portfolio? I want to get prepared. What's a project idea? So that's one question. And the second question, similar, is also just, well, how do I build my portfolio? How do I start a project? How do I get into data scientist? How do I do it? And my answer to most of the people that ask that is to say, well, if you want to be a data scientist, do the work of a data scientist, right? Yes, you can go out and get certifications. You can go and do different things like that. But personally, I think it's more important to just do the work, to be involved in the industry. In a way, that's kind of the beauty of data science, that there really is no official certification or something like that. Like, if you wanted to be an accountant or a stockbroker, there's like official licenses you have to earn for that. That doesn't really apply in data science, right? In data science, you can just be a data scientist, right? Or a couple of years ago, there was this concept of the citizen data scientist, right? Where somebody could just take it upon themselves to do data science with different, pieces of data that were available, right? So I'm a big fan of that. And that's usually why I answer those questions with, well, if you want to be a data scientist, be a data scientist, right? And I had a video on this, I think just last week, about how, nobody's going to come along and anoint you, and touch you with a magic wand and say, you are now a data scientist. And that's the impression I get from talking to a lot of you, that people are waiting to be anointed a data scientist, right? You're waiting for that corporate job to come along and award you the title of a data scientist. And I don't think you have to do that. So today, I'm going to walk through an example of how you actually get a data science project off the ground. I think that's an important thing because, it's a common answer that I give to people, but now I want to enable you with an example of what I actually mean by that, because, it's not 100% helpful of me to just say, well, just do the data science work without actually showing you, how to get started, right? So that's what I'm hoping to accomplish today. So I hope you'll be with me for the duration. I hope that you'll participate in the chat. Feel free to ask questions of me, or to, if something's not clear, feel free to stop me, whatever you'd like. But that's what I want to accomplish today. I have a view set up so that we can take some notes, so that you can see some things on the screen and kind of go from there. Okay. So before we get into it, I just want to acknowledge the chat. Tony says, good morning. Hey, Tony, nice to see you. Patrick says, I love the musical intro. Thanks for that. Yeah, I try to put some production value into these. I'm a one-man shop over here, but, I'm trying to run a world-class show here. So thank you thanks for that feedback. AJ Patro. AJ, today is not necessarily a stream where I'm going to be taking a lot of questions. Today is more on the instructional side, okay? Zed Rangar says, hello, Dennis. Well, hello to you too. Thanks for being here, Zed. Leo Halfeld, a great supporter of the show, says, hey, nice to see you, Leo. Good to see you here. Umair Sams, how to get started as a fresher in a DS field without master's or PhD. Well, this is exactly what this class is about, Umair, so glad you're here. That's exactly what I'm going to cover. I'm going to show you guys how to actually get a project off the ground and actually get started with data scientists. Get started as a data scientist. And again, I'm going to be giving you some of the things that I did. And, just kind of work from there, right? And show you guys how it's actually done, how I actually did it, how I would do it today, things along those lines, okay? Jesse says, thank you so much for this. You're welcome, Jesse. Thanks for being here. Hope you enjoy it. Prince Kara, Prince, I know you've been a fan of the chats before. Thanks for being here. Prince says, hey, Dennis. So Umair also says, thank you, excited for it. Well, thank you, Umair. Stick around. Hopefully everybody will be able to learn something. And if something's not clear, feel free to stop me. I'm somebody who's very much, willing to just stop if something's not clear. I don't mind you interrupting me, so feel free to put something in the chat. I'm going to try to keep as much of an eye on the chat as I can. I think I've set it up in the other screens so that I'll still be able to see the chat come up. If I miss something, let me know. But okay, good. Those are all the chat messages I'm seeing. I'm seeing more people than I am chatters. That's okay. Some people might be shy. If something comes up or other people join, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat briefly. But let's get started. So let me set the scene for you, because again, I'm sharing things that I did here in this class. So let me set the scene for you. I was a software developer for a long time, for what I call the first half of my career. But I wasn't really happy doing it. It was a good paycheck, a good job, but I wasn't really happy doing it. So I did some searching, wanted to find what my passion was. As some of you know, I recommend the book Mastery by Robert Greene. And I determined that data science was really where I wanted to go. And that's the mastery that I wanted to create for myself. That's what I wanted to kind of dedicate my life to, right? And I've done that for the greater part of the last 14 years, something like that. So when you do that, you have to take an honest look at your resume and your skill set and say, well, is this the resume of a data scientist? And I didn't have that. So I went back to school, did some graduate studies. But more importantly, I also took it upon myself to do the work of a data scientist. And that's really what I recommend for a lot of you. Now, keep in mind, when I said that, I didn't have any interviews. I didn't have a contract client. I didn't have a full-time job as a data scientist. Nobody was paying me for it. I just wanted to do it myself. Not just to prove it to myself, but also just to learn. Like that was me putting in the time, putting in the hours. Remember, data science is a profession. It's a serious profession. You're not going to learn it just by watching some YouTube videos and trying to, hack the data scientist interview, right? You have to put in the time. You have to develop your skills. So that's kind of the period that I want to take all of you back to and say, well, have I taken the time to develop my skills? And I'm going to show you how you can put in some of that time. So what I did was it was every Wednesday and Thursday, I blocked out my afternoons, and at 2 p.m. I would go to my local coffee shop, my local Starbucks, and I would sit there from 2 p.m. until they kicked me out at night, and I would just do work on data science. That was me putting in the hours, and I did that to get me in a whole other environment, get myself, just kind of focused on data science. And the way you start that, the way that I think that, the best instances of data science are done are not by starting with code, not by starting with tutorials, but by starting with questions, right? Because remember, data science is the application of the scientific method, ultimately. That's what data science is. Data science is the continual application of the scientific method. And if you're willing to look at data, look at articles, then you're asking questions. And if you're asking questions, what are you doing there? You're developing your curiosity. It's super important to be curious as a data scientist, right? You can't take things at face value and be a data scientist. You have to be curious. So those are the skills that I started developing. How can I take different things that come across my way, different articles, different things that come across, and apply the scientific method to them, or in other words, apply my data science skills to them. And I would do this every Wednesday and Thursday from 2 p.m. until like 10 o'clock at night, whenever the coffee shop closed, whatever it was. I would just sit there and I would just dedicate the time to it. Okay? So let me make my first transition to my screen. This is the screen where we're going to take notes, but okay. So I hope all of you guys can see that, and I see that the chat is also up, so that's great. So this is going to be our classroom view, where you're going to be able to see different things, right? So this is where I would start. So when I'm saying that I was putting in the time, I wasn't starting with YouTube tutorials. I was starting with the news. So this is Yahoo News, and I'm just using this as a general example of this is kind of like where I would start, because this is where data science starts. Data science starts with your own curiosity. Equally important to that, it starts with your curiosity about the business world, because I see so many people, either online influencers or other people or the way people study, they get a little bit too caught up in the math and the theoretical side of data science. At the end of the day, data science is a practical science that is applied to the real world, right? More likely than not, you as a data scientist are going to end up working for some sort of corporate environment. And those corporate environments want you to apply data science to their problems, to their business problems. So my study of data science from the very beginning was focused on, how do I use this in the real world, right? What does it mean for the real world? Not what is this and matrix multiplication and different activation functions. There's a place for that, but that's not the real world of data science, right? So my study would start here with articles like this, or rather with a news aggregator like this, okay? And then in turn, that would lead, give me just a second to bring up another window. Sorry guys, this is my first time doing these types of displays back and forth. Oh, right, I know what I did wrong. So working there would lead me to an article like this. So this article is an example of what would have caught my eye reading from something like a Yahoo News, right? This is where I'm looking at this and I'm saying, oh, there's an interesting study that was put out by FINRA. Now, for those of you who don't know, FINRA is one of the primary financial licensing agencies here in the US. So for example, if you want to be a stockbroker or things having to do with investments, like you want to be an investment advisor, or you want to work with like natural resources and commodities, you want to sell commodities and things like that, you would be licensed by FINRA. So they're a very large, very legitimate agency here in the US. And this article would have caught my eye, where it's talking about financial capabilities of the average US adult. And I remember that this type of stuff interests me because they had a particular question that caught my eye. And the question was around if you had a serious emergency, would you be able to come up with $2,000, in a very short amount of time, right? Like, your family member or you had a very serious emergency, you need money. Can you come up with it? And it turns out that a large portion of the US population can't. So something like that, kind of catches my eye, right? Like, why is that not possible? Now, again, remember at this point, I'm using my business mind. I'm using my curiosity. I haven't involved any, algorithms or formulas or anything, right? You have to approach it with a business mindset. So that's where I'm starting. And that's why something like this would have caught my eye. The second reason why this would catch my eye is because the bigger the agency, the more likely they are to also be releasing their raw data with their studies. So a study like this is an example of something that's a perfect candidate for somebody like you, a student of data science, a citizen data scientist, to go out and say, hey, let me dig a little further into this. This seems really interesting. So if we take this one step further, there is a link in here that goes directly to FINRA, right? So the other thing I'm looking for here is, again, I'm using my scientist mind here, is I want to make sure I'm going to the root data, right? I'm going to the root source, right? Because a lot of these articles, they're actually press releases that link to the news agency, that link to the marketing, all that stuff. You want to make sure that you're going straight to the root data, right? So the first thing that I'm looking for is I'm looking kind of to understand their methodology, right? And then that way I can kind of gather and say, okay, well, what is their methodology? What other questions were they asking? And is this something that I can dig deeper into? So as you can see here, I'm kind of just slowly scrolling down. I can see that they have the capabilities report over on the right-hand side. They also have their investor report over on the right-hand side. And then more importantly, I'm also seeing that they have highlights available. And then the key is that they also make their data available. They make the data sets available. So now this is telling me that this is something that not only can I look at it with a critical eye, I can also look at their data and make my own decisions, make my own studies from it, right? Or if you want to look at it another way, one of the reasons why they would make their data available is because of peer review, right? Peer review is a critical part of the scientific method. You should make yourself open to review at any time, right? So something like this, again, the topic catches my eye. It's very much a business-focused article, and they make their data available. This is a perfect example of something that you could be using for data science and to apply your own data science work, right? Okay, so I want to take the time right now to go ahead and document everything that we've talked about, because I think it's also important to document your work when you're working as a data scientist, right? So we're going to do here. First thing we're going to do is we're going to write down some goals. First goal is, let's see. So first thing I want to say is I want to make sure that you guys are open to asking questions. And then I want to demonstrate the actual work, my actual thought process of what I'm doing for data science. And then the other goal is I want to end at a point where we can apply algorithms Okay, so those are the goals that I want all of us to accomplish today. I need to correct that, because that's really kind of what we're setting ourselves up for, right? And I want to see what we've done so far. Sorry for my typing. My typing is terrible because I have my lights and stuff like that in the way here. But the first thing we've done is right. So we're taking a business mindset, right? We're not starting with formulas or calculus or even tutorials, right? We're starting with a business approach, right? And then here. Okay, so that's the work that we've done so far, where we're able to say, hey, this is a study that has potential. This is a study that we could use to develop something bigger out of it, right? So now the next step is to actually start looking at the study. So let me bring that back up, and it looks like they have a highlights available. So let's start with the highlights. I want to go ahead and open that in a new tab. So the highlights are nice because it lets us kind of have a little bit of a visual view into what they found, right? So again, I'm using kind of my own critical eye here as a data scientist. So this is the first thing that catches my eye. What catches my eye here is that they've done this study multiple times. So what does that mean? Well, that means that we can do trend analysis, right? We can do a time series analysis on this, right? So that's going to be really key. That's one of the things that, you don't always get from a study. A lot of studies might just be one-off studies, right? So the fact that they're doing it multiple times is super key for us to consider in the future. I'm also noticing things like their last two studies, 2018 and 2021, kind of an important period there, right? And obviously I'm referring to the pandemic. So now the statistician in me says, well, maybe there's skewed data in here between these 2 years, right? The world was a different place in 2018 versus 2021, right? So now I'm saying, well, how do they account for that? Did they account for that? If they didn't account for that, then is that something that I could do as part of my study, right? Because remember, we're looking for ways to add to this study. We're looking for ways to improve on the study or kind of do something different, right? So that's what I'm looking at here. So let's keep going. Let's keep going down their visualizations. There's something really key on this visualization. Does anybody in the chat, I think I have my chat open here. Does anybody in the chat want to kind of take a guess at what the key part is on this particular screen? Something is jumping out at me, and I think it should jump out to a lot of you. Anybody want to take a guess here? Give people I'll give you guys 30 seconds in the chat to go ahead and give a reply. What do you guys think? That's right, Tony. So Tony Tony says the amount of people surveyed. That's exactly right. That is super key on this screen. Why? That's our N value, right? Again, see, now we're going from I'm reading this study to actually using some of my statistics and some of my data science knowledge. That's my N value, right? I need to know how many people were part of my sample, right? And then Tony says, and where the survey was taken. That's right. Yeah. I mean, obviously it's a US based survey, but yeah, you need to make sure that across the 50 states, there was a sufficient sample to represent all the states, so on and so forth, right? You also need to make sure that 27,000 represents a critical mass, things along those lines. But the point is that this is where we start to kind of take in that info. We start to take in something that, we're seeing on the internet that started as a press release, but now we're saying, okay, well, wait a minute. How many people were involved? Was it all 50 states? How many people were from some of the smaller states or some of the less populated states, right? So these are the types of tasks or thought processes that I think are really critical to apply, that I applied when I was, starting out. And again, this is me starting out, sitting in a coffee shop, no contracts, no interviews, nobody's paying me to do it. I'm just being a data scientist. So Tony, good eye on that. This is exactly the type of a process that, you need to have. So let's keep going. Let's keep going down some of their visualizations. So obviously it looks like they're highlighting the global pandemic. They're also highlighting the rise of crypto, which definitely happened in that same period. Going to keep on scrolling down here. Now it looks like they're going to their second phase of their visualization. So let's see what else they have. Okay, so now we're starting to get to some of their graphs, talking about anxiety, personal finances. Obviously affects mental health, which is something that we're constantly concerned with. So they're showing some of their results from their survey. It looks like they're breaking down some of their age brackets and how that anxiety applies. They're talking about how often people think about their personal financial conditions, which obviously can be a precursor or some sort of a correlated indicator to to the stress or the anxiety you feel about it if you think about it constantly. And basically, you can sit here and you can go through some of their items that they have highlighted, right? So here it looks like they're doing a little bit of trend analysis also around the emergency or rainy day funds for 3 months. So it looks like some people were able to increase their rainy day funds while others did not. It just, it depends on the different breakdowns that are available, right? But again, we're just going through all of this. My intent is not to go through every statistic. My intent is to show you that, these are the things you have to go through and kind of process in your mind and apply your own thinking, your own judgment, and to some degree, your own bias to what you think about some of these items, right? So I would encourage you to keep on going through a study like this, and you can see some of the themes also. Because remember, we eventually have to settle on one of these themes that we want to study, right? So they've shown some stuff around anxiety, around mental health, around, what was the previous question? About covering your emergency expenses, your retirement plans. So we're looking for things that kind of catch our eye or things that we are interested in researching further, right? So now that we've hit that section, it goes on to financial products and, have you used your mobile phone for payments? Maybe you're in that industry, right? Maybe that's one of the industries that you want to eventually hope to work in. So when you're studying data science, maybe this is something that you would grab a hold of and say, hey, I want to look into this topic further, right? So this is talking about mobile payments or mobile transfers from person to person, which has been around for longer than the last 3 years, but arguably has gotten more popular. So you would kind of take that into your calculations of what you want to look at further. So lots of things around mobile apps or person-to-person transfers, managing your accounts online. So now going into the next section, it's about the ability to make ends meet, which again is the reason why this caught my eye, because I'm always fascinated by people who can or can't come up with certain amounts of emergency funds that they need. So this is something where I would personally spend more time, because this is just what interests me, right? And wherever it would interest you to spend other times based on whatever industry you want to work in or what you want to do in the future is where I would encourage you to go with your own individual study. This is talking about job losses and drops in income. This may or may not interest you. Now we're talking about some of the breakdowns as far as the different categories of ethnicity that went into some of the respondents. Maybe this is something where you'd want to make sure that ethnic groups were equally represented across the study. Again, knowing our sample size of 27,000, how many of them were of individual ethnic classes, that might be something that you want to look into. All valid approaches for somebody who wants to study data science and wants to kind of get into this world. So we keep on going. Lots of visualizations that they're making available here. And then I think that the financial knowledge and education is their last section, where, you know, they basically talk about how people handle credit cards, how people handle debt, how people handle spending. So all of this stuff is just really good data for you to apply and say, hey, that's something that I could dive deeper into. And that's, again, that's really the goal of what we're doing here. So keep going here all the way down to the bottom. Pick the visualizations, or pick the study and the visualizations that appeal to you. And that's it. I think after this, it goes to one of the general information. We're basically back to the home page, right? Okay. So again, let's stop here and let's think about what just happened. So I think we have a pretty good study on our hands here, right? Let me open it up back up to the chat. Let me know what all of you think about this. Because here, what I'm trying to do at this point is I'm trying to do a little bit more collaboration. Because you're not going to be a data scientist by yourself, not likely to be by yourself, right? Most people doing data science in a corporate environment are working in a team. So I want all of you in the chat to play the role of my teammates. It's a very important part of the process to talk things out in a collaborative environment with the other data scientists, right? So in the chat, I want to hear from all of you. Give me some feedback on this study. Is there something that caught your eye? Is there something that you think might be flawed with the study? Maybe you think 27,000 is not a big enough sample. I don't know. Tell me, right? My perspective, it's good, but I want to be open to other people's perspectives, right? Because that, you know, as a data scientist, you have to be open-minded, right? You have to be open to being wrong. So I want to give me some feedback in the chat, and maybe somebody in the chat will say something that catches your attention and you want to reply to that. It's totally okay. It's totally okay to have a dissenting opinion when you're a scientist. So let me know in the chat what you think. But I think we have a pretty good study on our hands. But let me know. So I'm already seeing one volunteer. Let me see if I'm able to highlight this chat. I'm able to highlight it, but it comes up really small. So let me read it out loud. Ravindran A says, if they answered most questions from the data set, for what problem are we trying to solve? That is an excellent question, my friend. I love the question. You are on the right track. You are on the right track with asking that question. I'm going to come back to that, okay? So give me just a bit. I want to make sure we're opening up to the chat. But I want to see if there's any other chat replies that people give. But let me know what you think of this study. Let me know if something caught your eye. Maybe you're really into mobile payments, so you want to do something on mobile payments or whatever the case may be. But Ravindran, you're asking an excellent question. While people think and while people participate in the chat, I will go ahead and start taking some more notes. And Ravindran, pay attention here because I might be hitting on some of the things that you're asking, okay? So we are looking at the FINRA study, and we know it's called the Financial Capability Study because they have other studies, right? So we need to be specific. We know that their N value was 27,000. I think it was like 100 something. And then we know that the visualizations are available, and we've been through that. What else do we know about the study? We know that the PDF is available, and we know that the data is available. Okay, so Tony in the chat asks, what was the method of collecting the data? Great question, Tony. Great question. Data collection, how do I put this? I don't know if you guys realize this, but in data science and even statistics as a whole, there are entire studies, entire classes dedicated to research methods. How you sample, how you ask questions, how you phrase questions, that's a whole other field of study. So I love where your thinking is going with that, Tony, because that is indeed a very key question. They help you understand that if we go back to this, we go back to the website. Here, they let you take the quiz. There's a section here where you can actually go through the same quiz that was given to the respondents. So that way you can judge on your own and say, yeah, that makes sense, or no, I think that might be a flawed study, right? It's perfectly okay for you to come to the conclusion that it's a flawed study, right? But what I really want to show appreciation for, Tony, in your question is that you're applying that critical eye, right? And that's exactly what we should be doing. And that kind of dovetails into our previous question. I'm sorry, I forgot the name. Was it Ravindran? Right? It ties into Ravindran's question because what I want to emphasize is that right now we're still in a general period, right? We're still just taking in information. We're not making any judgments just yet, or we're not adding to the study at this point. We're just taking in information, right? So Ravindran, you're discussing the next step, right? In saying, well, what are we going to do with this? And I love that you're thinking ahead, because that's exactly what what we should be considering. We should be considering, what can we add to this? What is the value add? You're going to hear that a lot when you're in the corporate world, right? The value add. What is the value add that you are giving to this study, right? So Ravindran also writes, maybe forms are distributed to different companies. Yeah, maybe. I mean, this sounds like it's more of a consumer questionnaire than it is a business questionnaire. But yeah, maybe it was done with forms. Maybe that brings a form of bias, right? Where if you're interviewing people who don't have an internet connection or don't have a mobile device, maybe that skews the results, right? So yeah, maybe they did it via forms. These are all critical questions to ask, right? So Ravindran and Tony, I love your train of thought. That is exactly the type of eye that we need to apply to this. Okay, so going back to our note taking, I want to make sure we fill out some notes there, because again, it's important as a professional. It's important to document your work, right? PDF is available, data is available. Let me add something here. Are available and have been reviewed, right? We essentially just went through a review of everything that they have, right? So let me copy this slide because I want to make sure we maintain the FINRA study. Okay. Patrick Stefanik says, did they collect location data? Great question. I don't know, right? And this is what we should start doing, right? They make their data available, right? So that's what we need to start doing. So Patrick, I think you're asking a really critical question that dovetails into Tony and Ravindran's thoughts. So let's start doing that. So let me write down some notes here real quick. And I think all of you are asking another question. Okay. So, by the way, if something doesn't look right to you in the notes or you want me to expand on something, let me know. Because, I as the secretary in your data science meeting could be adding some of my own bias to the notes, right? It's important to make notes public. So if you guys don't agree with something, let me know. Okay. So Tony, let me make sure I get caught up with the chat here. So Tony says, in speaking of bias, what class of the American citizen was surveyed? For example, lower class, middle class, upper middle class? Great question, Tony. Great question. That's exactly how studies end up being biased, right? Because you don't have enough distribution, enough representation along with this, right? Ravindran says, what was the impact on the consumers from this financial report? Another great question. Maybe there wasn't any and we can find some, right? Maybe that's one of the value adds that we can do, right? So we're going to loop back to that, Ravindran. And while we're looping back, I want all of you to take a stab at it. I know that you're looking at the study real quickly, right? You're just being introduced to it today, but maybe there are some questions that you can come up with, right? But that's what I did, right? Because, when I was sitting there in the coffee shop, it only took me 3 hours or whatever to go through the study. The rest of the time you're sitting there saying, okay, well, what can I get out of this? What can I do with this, right? So start thinking about that in the chat, guys, while I'm going through the messages. Kevin, good to see you. Kevin says, similar to what Tony was asking, could there be some bias that might have ensured that the people that were surveyed were generally in the higher or weaker economic sections of the state? Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, that could absolutely happen, right? So I love where the chat is going with this, right? You guys are applying your scientific peer review to say, is this a sound study? Was this study conducted in a sound way? And I love that. That's a critical part of the scientific method. That's why we publish, right? You publish because you want to have something that stands up to scrutiny, right? And this is something else that I talk about a lot with my teams. When I'm leading data science teams, I always emphasize methodology. I don't care what answer you give me. Show me that you got to that answer in a sound way, right? I care about the process of how you got to that answer. So that's really kind of like the underlying theme that everybody in the chat right now is bringing up, where we want to make sure that they got there in a sound way. And that's excellent. I love that all of you are bringing that up. So good job, guys. And, and if there's other people in the chat that want to contribute to this, please feel free to jump in. But you guys are absolutely on the right track. But think about this, though. And I wrote this in the notes. So look at the last bullet point. Because there's multiple things that we could be doing with this study. And so far, I think there's 3 of them, right? There's 3 of them. The first one you guys have already hit on. Was this a sound study? Can we as scientists kind of, punch holes in their study? We really shouldn't be able to, right? We should be able to conclude and say, hey, this is a good study. But you're asking some very valid questions there. How was the study conducted? Were they using forms? Were they using phone calls? That was Tony's idea. Kevin writes about, well, what if it was not distributed properly among economic classes? That's a concern, right? So these are the types of things that we're thinking about. But that's just that one basket, right? The next two baskets that I want everybody in the chat to start thinking about is, what are the things that we could be doing on an analytics basis versus what can we be doing on a data science basis? And I'm breaking it out that way because the future problems that you will face or that you will be trying to solve in the business world, whoever you end up working for and whatnot, are going to be are going to start with that same root question. What can be solved with analytics and what can be solved with data science? Neither one is better or worse or newer or older than the other. It's just different tools for the same data, right? Or in some cases, you might need to involve other data to become a data science problem, things along those lines, right? But I want you to think about those three buckets. We have really good ideas for that first bucket, but now what? Now what can we be doing analytically? What can we be doing that's going to require more of a predictive approach, right? Because when you need the predictive side, that's the data science side, right? So this is where I want all of you kind of start thinking about and start saying, okay, yeah, we can look at their study, but I also want to look at their analytics. Because here's the thing, right? Here's another thing I want to make sure that is emphasized to you. We looked at their analytics, but looking at their analytics is just looking at what they want to show you, right? I would never want you or any data science team to just accept that and say, well, that's all the analytics that's possible. Well, no, there's a lot of analytics that are possible. You have to come up with them, right? Worst case scenario, you verify what they told you, but maybe they missed something. Maybe there's another analytics level that you're curious about, right? Some of that curiosity, and maybe I'm getting ahead of myself here, but some of that curiosity begins with interactions, right? Can you show that the people who did habit X, some financial habit X, are also more likely to do financial habit Y, right? So for example, I'm going to use a little bit of a silly example, but really quickly in their visualizations, we saw that they had people who were saving for retirement, right? Who had some retirement savings versus not. And then you had people that were doing mobile payments. Is there a correlation there? Maybe, maybe not. But that's where you start to develop that curiosity, those questions, right? And that's where you're able to kind of start that data science engine, that data science process, right? Because now you're actually working into you're doing the work, right? And you're going to hear me talk a lot about questions. The reason I focus on questions is because questions are usually a great start for hypothesis, right? So now we're making that shift into the scientific method. So again, a little bit of a silly example, but bear with me. Retirement accounts and mobile payments. You could sit there and say, well, people who are responsible enough to have a retirement account are probably really careful and protective of their finances. So I bet that those people are less likely to use mobile payments because of the risk that mobile payments present, right? Because it's on your phone. There's usually a third-party gateway involved, and you have to connect it to your bank account. So I bet that those people are very hesitant to use mobile payments. Well, guess what? That sounds suspiciously like a hypothesis, right? Now you have a hypothesis there to say people with retirement accounts are very careful with their money, therefore they are your least likely customers for a mobile account, a mobile payment account. So guess what? That's something you'd be doing at a payment provider or even a bank, right? To say, hey, I bet that your retirement clients don't like using Zelle because Zelle is too risky. And by the way, for those of you not in the US, Zelle is a person-to-person payment platform that we have here in the US, right? It's like a bank-to-bank, person-to-person platform. So you just created a hypothesis that is useful to a bank, right? So that's why you're going to hear me focus on these questions, because now we're doing the work of a data scientist. Now we're using the scientific method, because a hypothesis is the first part, right? So now, you can use that to kind of go deeper and deeper. But these are the types of things, again, that I'm using as examples to tell you of what the critical eye you should be bringing to these studies. So let me know if that makes sense, guys. I hope it does, because again, this is how I started. This is what I sat in the coffee shop for hours thinking about. So let me see some more of the chat here. So Tony says, can you give a brief definition example of analytics? Is this just the stats listed? Okay. Ravindran says, since we have past year's data set, we can perform predictive analysis and classification analysis. Absolutely. But we're going to come back to that, Ravindran. I love where your thinking is going. Let me address Tony's question first. Can you give a brief definition example of analytics? Is this just the stats listed? So Tony, when I work with my corporate clients, the most basic definition that I offer up to them is that analytics is backwards looking at what has already happened versus where data science can give you the predictive side of what can be coming up, or different ways to classify things, or again, just more of that automated prediction side of your data. So that's kind of like the dividing line that I draw. Analytics is backwards looking, data science, algorithms, all that is forward looking. That's the briefest thing that I can use. I also emphasize to say, though, it's not to say that one is better, one is the other. Analytics is living in the past. None of that. They are equally important. And to me, they're really all just tools. It all comes back to the scientific method. It's just what tool you're going to apply. Analytics is a tool. Data science is a tool. Python is a tool. Neural networks are a tool. It's just a matter of what you're applying to the core question, the core business question that you're trying to answer. Sometimes the answer can be done in analytics. Sometimes you need a very complex neural network to solve it. It just depends, right? So I hope that helps, Tony. Let me know if it didn't. But that's the definition I give to my business clients. Who may or may not have a technical background. It just depends. But that's the answer I give. Okay, so Ravindran says, we can use the past year's data set to perform predictive analysis and classification analysis. Yeah, sure. But there's a challenge there, Ravindran. The challenge with that is that you're still just using the same data sets, right? You have to be willing to also think outside of this data set and say, well, maybe there's other data sets I can bring in, right? Maybe I need to be looking at like job data or pricing data of different like baskets of goods. Or maybe I need to look at weather data. Maybe the weather has some sort of effect on some of these results. Who knows, right? That's why we do these studies, right? So what am I doing? I'm describing the process of data wrangling, data enrichment, data munging, all these kind of related topics, but it's really data enrichment, right? So I love where you're going with that, Ravindran, but you have to be willing to also go outside and enrich your data. Because remember, we're doing our own study, right? We don't just want to rehash what's here. We want to do our own study and, not just help our company or whatever our industry is. We want to bring something new to the discussion, right? We're not just sitting here rehashing the data. We want to do other things with it, right? We want to make sure we're working on our own insights and our own development of the data, right? So Tony says, thank you. Thanks for being here, Tony. I hope that helped. But I'm loving your questions, so keep them coming. Ravindran says, if the data set is too large, we can use data science for understanding what data set has rather than predicting. Yeah, sure. But we know that the data set's not too large. It's 27,000 records in the sample, right? So yeah, we could be doing that, but in this particular study, and you're right, maybe you're thinking beyond this study. You could be thinking beyond this study, but in this particular study, it doesn't seem like it's particularly deep study, right? This is more about what else can we add to the study, right? Or again, I'm interested in these correlated effects, right? So, like for example, when I started this, I told you guys that this whole study caught my eye because of this capability of people to pay an emergency, right? I'm fascinated by that. I'm fascinated by people who have trouble, not coming up with not able to come up with like funds for an emergency. So, what causes that? What are some of the correlated aspects that I can pull from this data to answer that, right? So that's kind of where my thinking is. What are some of the correlated ethnicities or age brackets or states where this is more likely to happen? Maybe it's skewed, right? Maybe there's particular states that have a lot of people who have trouble coming up with a certain amount of money, right? So now I'm interested in that. I want to look into that a little further, right? So that's where I would encourage all of us to start thinking. But all of you are doing a great job of coming up with these different angles. So keep on going down that path, because when you're exercising that mindset, those questions, guess what? You're doing the work of a data scientist. This is where the work of data science is, right? Here's another reason why I want to emphasize this process to all of you. One of the hardest things of going from academics or certifications or whatever, however you study data science, to going into the corporate world, is that people, your colleagues, are going to be coming to you for the ideas of the projects and what to work on. See, in school, your professor gives you the ideas, or it's a Kaggle competition and it's sponsored by somebody who gives you the idea or whatever, right? That's not the real world. In the real world, they're going to call a meeting and they're going to say, "Hey, this is so and so, our new data scientist, and he's going to impress us with the 10 ideas that he has for what data science can do for us." And you better be prepared in that meeting, otherwise you're going to be like, "I have no idea." Right? You have to sit there with the company data, with the company reports, and you're going to have conversations with people from accounting and people from marketing and people from customer service. And then you're going to have to say, "Okay, here's 5 ideas that I see," right? So that's why I like how you guys are going through this, because it is important. You're going to be the ideas person in the company. Nobody's going to hand you ideas, right? So I love the way you guys are thinking right now. So Tony says, would you say that the cost of living in each state could skew the answers? Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Right. But again, that's something where you're still kind of in that first bucket there, Tony, right? Where you're validating this study. And that's good. That's important. But the value add is not quite there, right? We haven't taken a verification is not building on their study. It's still an important part of the process, but it's not building on something. We're not creating something new from it, right? So keep that in mind for me, okay? All right. So now this is kind of where I want to, let's stay focused back on the study and say, okay, well, what's analytics and what's data science, right? Or how can we enrich this data, right? What else can we do with this data? We should be able to have answers for those. So let's go back to the study itself, or the study website. Let me open that up on my end. So here we were looking at the survey, but now let's go back to kind of like the whole study homepage. And this study homepage now focuses on the data. And this says, here is how you can use the NFCS data. And I believe it's down here. This is the promised land, right? Wherever you see something that says download data, like, you should be excited, right? I mean, this is what data scientists live for, right? When you can get raw data. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click on that. And look at this. You can download the reports. You can download the questionnaire, right? So Tony, I think you had questions on the questionnaire. I'm seeing every single report that's available. So Ravindran, that dovetails with your earlier thoughts about seeing what else is available. To use early reports to predict the results in future reports. So this is where you would start, where you would be focused. And we're going to look on the download data and data info. There's a disclaimer here. I think we can call ourselves a researcher, not an academic institution, because we want to be truthful. We are a researcher, or if you are a student or whatever, if one of these applies to you, feel free to do that. But I'm going to be honest and say I'm an independent researcher. I submit that. And I don't think you can see it on my share, but I now have the ability. It's presenting me with a download window, my local OS X download window. And I'm going to save this in my external research folder. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. Okay, it looks like it is coming up on the chat side, which is good. Because I'm not always sure what window OBS is sharing out or not sharing out. But it looks like you guys are able to see that. So now I'm going to go to that window. I'm going to open the archive. And it's going to give me a couple of different files. So give me... Okay, it looks like they're including the methodology and the questionnaire and the file info in their raw data. I'm going to open up a couple of things here. I'm going to open up two different things here. Let's see, did that open up? It did open up. Okay, so I'm opening up their data. I don't think you can see that just yet. Let me go to my OBS and share this out. Bear with me just a second here, chat. Zed says, is there a way I can listen to this video again? Yes, Zed. YouTube archives the video after this is done. I don't know how much longer we're going to go. We still got a little ways to go. But yes, when it's all said and done, you can come back to the same URL and it'll be here. I think it takes a little bit of time because they process the video or something. But yes, it will be available, and I'll also post it to my Instagram. I'll post a notice to my Instagram when the replay is available. So yes, if you miss something or you have to go, you can definitely come back to it. Yeah, so Ravindran and Tony, thanks for the assist there. But yeah, it'll be uploaded. Absolutely, Zen. Okay, so let me go back to my OBS and let me find a way to share this window with you guys. Give me just a second here. Okay. Okay, so let's keep going. This is the raw data that you get after clicking that link on that study. So does anybody want to speculate on a couple of things? A couple of things jump out at me when I see this data. I can tell you a couple of things already from looking at this data. Does anybody in the chat want to contribute to what they see? But there's a couple of key things that jump out at me in this data. What do you guys think? Anybody see anything? Give the chat here about 30 seconds to catch up. What do you guys think? And by the way, if you're just joining us, please don't be shy. Feel free to quickly introduce yourself in the chat. This is a data science course where I'm going through the methodology that I would recommend and I have used to get a new study off the ground. Again, the setting is that this is me wanting to be a data scientist. I don't have the sufficient resume for it, but I'm building my skills. I'm sharpening the saw. I'm putting in the hours to build my mastery. So the way I did it is every Wednesday and Thursday, I had an appointment with myself to go sit in my local Starbucks, my local coffee shop. I would sit there from 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. until they kicked me out, and I would just work. And this is the type of work that I would do. So I'm encouraging all of you to participate, make this an interactive session. So I'm seeing some great responses in the chat. Patrick Stefanik says, missing data, many null values. Okay, guys. So Patrick and Ravindran, you both caught on to what I thought, but why? What else does it tell you about the null values? Because my mind immediately went somewhere when I saw this. I want to see if you guys catch on to this. So Patrick says, strange numbers like 99, presumably bad data. Maybe, Patrick. Kevin says headers that don't make sense. Awesome. Thank you, Kevin. Ravindran says metadata about the columns. Okay. Hey, Sharmant Nicholas, our man in China. Good to see you, my friend. Thanks for making it. And yeah, great that you just joined. No shame in showing late. I have no idea how long we're going to go. I literally didn't write anything down. We could be here for the next few hours for all I know. We'll just see. But thanks for joining. Good to see you. Hope you're well. Tony says, it may just be me, but I have no way of knowing what these numbers mean, what the categories are. Okay. Kevin says data was not validated. Maybe, Kevin. Yeah, we should look at that. But again, that's validating the study. That's not a value add just yet. But you're absolutely right. Maybe there's too many null values there for your taste. You're absolutely right. Okay, another couple seconds here for anybody else who wants to contribute. But yeah, great observation so far. So let's talk about those null values. What caught my eye, what caught my eye was the 99s and the 98s. But here's the thing, guys. If you're old school like me, this tells you that they're using IBM. They're using IBM SPSS. Because that's the standard for null values in IBM SPSS. So that's the old that's the old man in me talking. Because I'm an old IBM guy. I've actually worked for IBM twice in my career. I've worked for professional services, and then I've also worked. I left, and then I came back, and I worked for one of their product teams. I was a scrum master for one of their product teams. But that's the old IBM guy in me saying, oh, this is IBM SPSS, because that's the default that they use in that package. So maybe not critical information to know, but this is me working in data. This is the data scientist mindset or abilities that you'll pick up. And you'll be able to say, oh yeah, that's a SAS package. I recognize it because of the SAS code, or yeah, that's using IBM because of this, and this. You're going to learn these things, right? This is part of being in the business, right? So yes, you guys were right about that, but if you just take it another step further, the null values are default IBM SPSS. So 100% guarantee they're using IBM for this. I believe it was Ravindran that talked about the columns. And you're right, these columns don't make sense, right? It's obviously some sort of metadata, some sort of shorthand. Some of the early ones you can make out, right? It looks like they're using a code for the states. They're using a census division, census area, or whatnot, right? But the rest are kind of nonsense, right? But that's okay. This is part of the research. This is us doing the work of a researcher, right? So before we go to the next one, let me go back to the chat. Patrick says missing data means an opportunity for imputation. Yeah, sure. Maybe. Ravindran says, since they are collected from different states, maybe they couldn't fill it. Yeah, that's also possible. Many reasons why there couldn't be that, right? Maybe the collections methods, right? Maybe people only filled out half the form instead of the full form, or maybe it was done by phone, and phone interviews tend to be a little faster, so that gave you more complete records than other methods, right? It just depends, right? But again, that's all just validating the study. That's not you adding something new. And that's what we're looking for. We're looking for opportunities to add something new, right? So let me bring up another document for you guys. Give me just a second. I didn't, or maybe I did prep this. I can't remember if I prepped this or not. I did prep this. Okay. Let me see how I can share that on OBS. Here we go. Okay. So this is the next portion that we need. And again, this is all in the download archive. I wasn't able to show the download process. But now, the next thing you're going to need, and you know, we're focusing on this study, right? But let's extrapolate this out. Whenever somebody gives you new data, you know, within your new job, the business that you're working at, the corporation you're working at, you're going to need what's known as a data dictionary, right? And the data dictionary is what should lay out what the data means to somebody who's coming from the outside, because you're coming to it from the outside, right? And you don't want to make any assumptions on this, right? You want to make sure that you're saying, hey, I don't want to speak to the data. I want the data to speak to me. So I don't want to make mistakes about what these columns mean or things like that. So what you're seeing up on the screen right now is an excellent example of a data dictionary. This data dictionary happens to be done very, very well, right? So this is where you're going to go ahead and pull and say, oh, okay, these are the ethnicities that they blocked out. These are the genders and the age brackets they blocked out. If we go a little further, we can see things like, oh, okay, that's what the NFCS ID is, which is the first column, right? The parentheses are the position. Oh, these are the states, right? These are the ID values for the states, and so on, right? So always make sure that you don't just ask for raw data, that you also ask for the corresponding data dictionary that goes with that data. Super important part of the process, right? Again, this happens to be a very good one, but you're going to need it. And these are the things, again, where now you're starting to go a little further in the data science process, right? Because earlier I mentioned a hypothesis. Okay, great. Now you know what you want to ask. But now, what are we looking at now? This is all the data collection phase, right? And you really shouldn't proceed any further unless you know you've got good data and you understand the data. So that's what we're doing now. Now we're doing the second phase, right? And again, this is what we want to do. We want to mature our minds to the data science process, right? So now we're in the data collection phase, right? So now, and I'm putting an emphasis on this because you shouldn't proceed any further unless you understand this phase. Massive mistake to move forward with just kind of sort of understanding the data, right? So be aware of that. Eunice, a new joiner to the chat. Welcome, Eunice. Good to see you. I think categorical columns are being converted to dummy variables. I don't think they're dummy variables, but they are definitely converted to variables. Sure, yeah. So yeah, they're not expressing the categorical label; they're expressing the categorical ID, and then they're relying on us to come here and look at their data dictionary to do that translation. And that's okay. That's a perfectly acceptable way to do it, right? You're going to come across that a lot in your future. But yeah, you're right. Here are the categories for the census division, for the regions, male, female, the buckets that they're using for the ages, so on and so forth. So yeah, Eunice, you're on the right track with your thinking. Again, I don't think they're dummy variables. I think they're very live variables. They're just, doing the conversion and relying for you to use the data dictionary. So you can see here the marital status and all that, right? Okay, so as the researcher, and again, this is me just working on my own, sitting by myself in the coffee shop. I'm going to be looking at all these. And I'm also going to be applying my critical eye to two things, right? I'm looking for how the study was given done. And I'm also looking for different questions that I could be asking. What can I add to this study? So yeah, I'm just going to sit here and I'm going to study it. I'm going to see a couple things that kind of catch my eye. Yeah. There's something here about education. And it goes on for quite a bit. It looks like there's 41 pages in this, right? So we're not going to sit here and go through every single page. But again, the point is that you need to familiarize yourself with the data. You need to kind of live and breathe the data a little bit, because this is going to spark things in your mind. It's already sparking things in my mind. I'm just kind of filing it away to share with you as we get to that stage. But you got to sit here with your data scientist mindset and pick up different things, right? So we talked about things that you could be doing analytically versus things you can be doing with data science, right? I want you to hold that in your mind. Let me get back to the chat here real quick. I think Ravindran's asking some important questions. Sir, can you give some suggestions to understand the data set from domains? I mean from different domains. So can you give some suggestions to understand the data sets from different domains? You know, Ravindran, there's no shortcuts there. It's basically what I'm going through right now. Give me your raw data and give me the corresponding data dictionary. You're going to be asking that of your clients and your stakeholders and everybody else in the future, right? And there's no shortcuts there, because once they hand that over to you, that's the work. That's the work of a data scientist. Now you got to sit there and you got to read through it. You kind of have to develop a feel for the numbers. You have to look at how they laid things out. Eunice earlier mentioned the categories. You have to get a feel for the categories. What are my categorical variables? What are my scalar variables, right? What are my ranges? Some of you mentioned earlier about how the data could be skewed. Well, it could be skewed by age, right? So give me the age range that is in my data. So Ravindran, there's no shortcuts here. This is the work of a data scientist, right? This is where, as we say in the US, the rubber meets the road. You got to do the work. At this point, we're at a good stage, because I feel like we're empowered to do the work. We have the data, we have the data dictionary, but now we have to use our skills and actually carry out the work. Hungry Ben says, I only know Python. Is it okay? Because that's the language I'm good at. I'm trying to avoid these types of questions right now, because I'm trying to keep us focused on the class. So if anybody else has questions on the class or the materials I'm covering, please let me know. But Ben, welcome to the chat. I see that you're new. Yes, you're going to be just fine with Python. Don't worry about it. And maybe I'll do some Python courses in the future. I don't know. Give me some feedback. Again, this is my first time offering any sort of data science instruction. I don't want to do pre-recorded stuff, so maybe I'll do a live Python class at some point. If there's interest in that, let me know. Give me some feedback on the session. And also, if you're here, please click on subscribe. Please click on the like button. It really helps me, helps promote the channel. It really encourages me to keep going. That's a form of feedback too. So please, feel free to join in that way also. Okay, so going back to this data dictionary. Again, I mentioned what are things we can do analytically versus what are things we can do with data science. Okay? So this right here is page number 1 of the entire data dictionary. There are things on here. There's actually one thing in particular that catches my eye. And again, I want you to think about this as a data scientist. There are things you can do analytically. There are things you can do with data science. Is there anything on this page? And let me look real quick. Let's just stay focused on page 1. Is there anything here on page 1 that catches your eye? Because something caught my eye on this page. What do you guys think? Is anybody else catching, looking at something at this page that catches their eye? I'm going to give you guys about 30 seconds. Remember, analytics, data science. What could we use on this page? Anybody in the chat? I use the time to take a drink of water, and I spilled on myself. Nobody? Okay. So there's something on this sheet that's catching my eye, and it's the age by gender. That to me strikes me as an opportunity for analytics. Because who's to say that these are the correct buckets? Who's to say that we should be looking only at 18 to 34? Because think about that. For the entire age range, they're only using 3 buckets? That seems kind of broad, right? It feels like that could be broken down a lot further. Maybe you could break it down to like a young adult. Young adult would be like 18 to like 25, 26, right? Maybe you'd want to break out the 35 to 54 seems pretty broad, right? So maybe you want to break that out a little further, right? I'm also applying some domain knowledge. And I know that in the financial services world, there's a lot of strict rules around the elderly and elderly financial abuse. And usually that category begins at 62 years old. So maybe going 55 plus is a little too broad. You want to go to 62 years old, right? So these are all things that we can get from the raw data, right? So maybe that to me is a perfectly valid initial analytics project. What do the results look like if I take the time to break out these age buckets further? Because who's to say that these are the right categories, the right age categories, right? Because that's what they've done, right? They've taken your ages and put them into buckets in their new categories. Well, who's to say there should only be 3 categories? What should be the new categories? For all you know, you're going to get completely different results if you use different categories. Right? That's 100% possible, right? So to me, that's the first thing that jumps out at me when I read this. That there is a very valid analytics project that you could be doing just from page 1. We haven't gone 1 page into this data dictionary, and we already have a project that you could add to your portfolio. You could do this. You could speak about it in your interviews. And you can say, hey, I took this great nationwide study and I found out that they actually miscategorize their ages. And if you look at these ages, you get completely different results. That is an amazing interview, right? You have just set yourself up for an amazing interview if you walk in and that's what you present, right? Or you put it in your writing sample, right? Some companies require a writing sample as part of the application. Make that your writing sample, right? And say, hey, this is the study I found. This is the modification I made. And these are the results that I found. That's great for an interview, right? You are setting yourself up for a pretty good interview if you can walk in like that, right? Okay, so great analytics project right off the bat, right? Page 1. Let me scroll down a little further. Something else caught my eye down here. What do I want to look at? Yeah. There's a couple others that caught my eye, but you could do this similar to, but we'll look at this. So I also talked about analytics and data science, but there's kind of a little bit of a gray area in between where you could study correlations, right? Almost like an applied statistics view, almost like a hypothesis testing view, right? Which isn't quite analytics and it isn't quite data science, right? But still valuable, right? So this caught my eye right here. Question A9 about their employment status. And remember that we already talked about some of the other visualizations and data that we saw from them, right? So this caught my eye, particularly the self-employed part. people who are self-employed tend to have kind of like different finances than other people, right? Because they usually have to like, they bill clients, and they usually have like a different tax return. Being self-employed is kind of like, can be a financial nightmare or not, depending on how you go about it. They also tend to have their own accountants when you're self-employed, right? Usually have somebody helping you with that. So one of the questions that pops up in my mind is, maybe self-employed people are better at keeping a retirement plan. Remember how there was like that retirement plan question about, are you putting away money and all that? Maybe self-employed people are better at that because they have an accountant, right? A person who just works like at a straight company, just collects a paycheck, they're not going to have an accountant because they don't have a complex tax return. But maybe that leads to those people having less financial or less retirement planning because they think, well, I'll always have a job, I'll always be employed, right? So that to me is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to say, well, that's my hypothesis. My hypothesis is that self-employed people are generally more responsible with their retirement savings. But then again, maybe they're more careless because they make more money, right? Or because when they invoice somebody, taxes aren't taken out of it. Taxes, they have to save money for taxes, and maybe they're not great at that. So maybe they're actually more financially irresponsible, right? So that to me sticks out as something that you can get from this data. That's kind of a pretty good project that you could be doing with this data, right? So again, that's me sitting down with this, looking at this and saying, well, what questions can I be asking of that? What questions can I be doing here? Like what's piquing my interest? What are the creative things that I can add to this data set to say, hey, yeah, I read your data, but let me add my own eye to it. Let me add my own research to it, my own questions. And what are we talking about there? We're talking about creativity, right? I did a video on this not too long ago, but to me, this is where the creativity in data science comes in. When people think of creativity in data science, they usually think of the visualization steps, right? The charts and graphs, right? And don't get me wrong, I'm not poo-pooing that the visualizations are a very critical part of the data science process. But don't think of that as the only creative outlet for data science. To me, this is where you distinguish yourself as a data scientist, where you add your creativity. And you can say, and people will say that about you and say, oh, hey, you know what? He saw something in that data. They asked a good question in that meeting. They saw an interesting correlation there, when we were having the discussion with the business side of the company, right? So I'm walking you through this process. I'm showing you what catches my eye because, this is me experienced after many, many years in the business. But these are the types of processes that helped me, and I hope help you, to be able to say, oh, okay, yeah, I'm not going to just take their data at face value. I'm going to do my own thing. I'm going to look at my own questions. And I do that by looking at how they broke things out. Why did they use that categorical bucket, right? Some people in the chat are mentioning categories. Well, you should question the category, right? Why is it a category? Why is it only 3 instead of 10 categories? I could think of 6 other categories. What happens when you bring in those categories? All critical questions, all part of the data science process, right? So this caught my eye, again, the self-employed. The other one that caught my eye too was up here about marital status, right? You're always hearing about these other studies about how married people are happier. Married people tend to live longer than single people, right? Well, are they more or less financially responsible? You could get that from this answer. These would be valuable answers to a bank, right? If you're applying to a financial institution. You could say, yeah, I found this FINRA study, but they didn't go deep enough for me. I wanted to break it out. Here's how I broke it out by married, single, or divorced, right? Or maybe you have an interest in people who are widowed, right? And what happens to people who are widowed? Maybe they end up in a better financial situation or a worse financial situation. So again, these are the things that I'm encouraging you to think about because this is the work of a data scientist. This is what's expected of us. This is your opportunity for that creativity, for that application of everything that you've read. And as I said earlier, no one's going to be coming to you with ideas. You're expected to come up with the ideas. And this is where that begins. Because now you can think about the work we just did, right? The work we just did, we could walk into a meeting and say, hey, we're the data science team, and here's 3 different ideas. We can look at widowers and how they end up financially after they've lost their partner. Or if you want, we can do a deep study into self-employed people. Are they better with retirement savings? Or we can do a deeper study on the analytics side, and we're going to break out the age buckets by every 10 years, 18 to 28, 29 to 38, so on and so forth, right? Now, you're doing the work of a data scientist, and you're presenting the business with options. They're going to tell you where they see the most impact, right? And then you're going to say, okay, yeah, we'll pursue that one study. You're going to go out, you're going to do the study, and you're going to come back with results, right? That's it. Rinse and repeat. That is the work of being a data science team, right? So was that helpful? Give me some feedback in the chat. I'm going to give you guys a minute or two. Give me some feedback, or maybe you have other questions or something didn't make sense. But, this is the work that you could be doing right now to develop the portfolio, prepare yourself for the interviews, but more importantly, develop the data scientist mindset, because that's really what we're after, right? You're not looking to hack the interview or read some list of questions on LinkedIn. You want to be a data scientist. The best way to pass the data science interview is to be in the business, right? As ironic as that sounds, that's the best way to walk in prepared. All right, so our friend in China says, would you please name the data set? I want to catch up. Yeah, so this is the FINRA Financial Capability Survey. It's a survey they run every 3 years. This is the 2021 edition that was published in 2022. They publish a year later. But again, I want to emphasize, and thank you for the question, because it does give me the opportunity to emphasize this. Please, this is not monkey see, monkey do. Please do not go out and just get this study. Go out and find your own study. Forge your own path. This is not the only study out there that makes data available. There's other studies out there, right? So, I really hope that you guys aren't going to come back to me and just keep on asking questions about the FINRA study. No, find your own study. Find your own way to add to your portfolio. This is all just an illustrative example. I'm trying to use the example to build a framework in your mind so that later on you can say, oh yeah, I read about this article, caught my attention, and the study also makes the data available. Let me take a little closer look at that, right? So please think about this in the terms of the meta framework that I'm trying to present to all of you, because that's really kind of like the win here. The win is for you to develop that mindset, not just looking at the FINRA study, okay? So Kevin says, when we ask questions like how the marital status is related to the financial independence of a person, are we doing data science? Can you explain? Yes, you are. You are, in the sense that you're kicking off. It's not, are we doing data science? It's, are we using the scientific method? Do we have the basis for a hypothesis? Remember, hypothesis is just a question. It's a question expressed as a potential answer, right? I believe that X can happen if Y also happens, right? That, in rough terms, that's the basis for, that's the template for a hypothesis, right? How you prove that can be data science, it can be analytics, it can be a lot of things. Well, it is data science as a whole, but the different tools the different tools that you're going to apply depend on the problem. Sometimes you'll apply analytics, sometimes it's just statistics, other times it's probability based, or whatever the case may be. Causal relationships, right? You can prove things with causal relationships. It's about the tool you're applying, but it is data science in the sense that you're looking at it from a scientific method approach, right? Because once we have the hypothesis, the next thing is, well, what are the tests that I need to conduct? And if I can determine the tests, what is the code that I need for those tests? Right? See, now we're talking about Python and code and VS Studio and all this other stuff, right? but those are just tools. So you'll notice again that I emphasize at the very beginning of this, I don't want to start with, hey, look at this Python code, or hey, I really think you need to be using Keras for neural networks. That can all come later. That's not the real work of a data scientist. The real work of the data scientist is the thinking, the framework that you're going to set up, right? And also keep in mind, the reason I'm emphasizing this is because this is also, I get a lot of questions from all of you guys about, well, is AI going to take my job? You know, just this morning, somebody asked me, do you think that the demand for data scientists is going to drop as AI comes into it? No, it's just a different way of looking at it, right? Because you as the human are still going to bring this framework, this way of thinking, the creativity. The only difference is that you're not going to write the code. The AI is going to write the code, right? But again, Python's just a tool. I hope you guys are with me on that. But that's why I'm emphasizing the meta framework, the thinking, because that's what's going to keep you employed for a long time. That's where you're going to be able to distinguish yourself and say, hey, you know, the way he thinks about data is really different than anybody else I've seen. We got to keep this guy around, or this guy gets it because he sees the different things in the data, right? AI is going to take a while to catch up to that, to be able to kind of see that bigger picture. So I want you to think about it in those terms, right? So yes, Kevin, we are doing data science. It's just a different application of the tools, right? You got to think of it as a framework. So Daniel Ramona says, super useful. Great. Thank you, Daniel. Appreciate that feedback. Carthy says, what do you mean by do your own study? Does that mean we conduct our own survey? If that's so, how we go about it? Excuse me. No, Carthy, that's not exactly what I mean. It can mean that you do your own survey. I do my own surveys now because, you know, I do all these crazy questions and different things I want to look at. So maybe later on in your career, yes, you'll do your own surveys. But it's not so much about that. When I say do your own study, I'm talking about adding value to what this existing study did, right? Because Carthy, I don't know, maybe you came in late or didn't see the earlier portions, but in the earlier portions, we went through all their visualizations, right? We didn't go through their PDF, and perhaps we should have, but who cares, right? That's they've already looked at that, right? I want to do something new to that. So when we come back here to looking at the married versus widowed versus single, that's a new study, right? Because now we're isolating for that group and saying, hey, I've heard that married people live longer and are happier. What do their finances look like? Their original PDFs and visualizations didn't address that. We can address that. That's the value add that our research can bring to this paper. Still using their raw data, right? We don't have to call anybody. We don't have to spend any extra money or anything like that. We can still look at their data, but now we can isolate. And we can say, well, here's how married people did. Well, here's how married people did versus widowed people, right? Is there a correlation there? Because you can go from married to widowed in a year, right? Or in a very quick amount of time. Or like I said earlier, maybe you don't agree with their age buckets. 18 to 34, that's a span of what, 16 years? Maybe you're not satisfied with that. Maybe you think that's too big of a span. What happens if the span of buckets was only 5 years, right? You kind of you micro categorize the ages. What happens then? You can get completely different results, right? So that's what I mean by a new study, Carthy. So I hope that makes sense to you. So no, I'm not saying that you have to, do your own survey, spend a lot of money, start from the beginning. No. Just look at their data, apply your critical eye to say, oh, this is interesting, but I can add to this. I have other ideas, right? I have other correlations I want to look at. That's what I mean by that. So I hope that makes sense, my friend. Thank you for being here. I know you're a big supporter, so thank you so much. Okay, so now, like I said, where I left off previously, is that, the collective data science team from this class can now walk into a meeting and say, we have these 3 ideas that we can get for you. It's going to be the same root study, right? It's going to be the same FINRA study. How do you want us to proceed? The business will pick one of your ideas, and then you go out and you say, okay, this is what we need to do in order to execute this study. So now you're going to be saying, okay, let's start writing some Python code, because now we need to translate these values from column A6 in the raw data, right? Column A6 is going to have these numbers. Let's put them into our categorical values. And we know we isolated, we know that we want to study just the married people. So maybe we can even filter out and just give me value number 1. See, now we're actually getting to coding. Now we're doing, and I hope you guys understand that now we're going to the place where all those other tutorials and all those other influencers, all those people start, which again, I think is the mistake, right? You don't start with code on day 1 of your data science career. That's a mistake. You start with the questions, with what's already out there, with what the business wants. So that's really kind of like the greater framework I'm trying to encourage all of you to do, because this is what I've done. This is how I've seen data science done in the real world, right? So I hope that makes sense. But I hope that you can also see that that right now you are essentially teed up to start on an actual study. So let me go back to our notes, because again, I think that's key. Give me just a second to catch up to you guys. Okay, so here's our FINRA study, and we've already broken out analytics versus data science, right? So here, let's take that one step further. Let's iterate that out. So analytics and data science. So while I'm typing, it gives you guys an opportunity in the chat to ask questions, take in some of this information. Maybe something doesn't make sense, just let me know. So on the analytics side, okay, so you can see here that on the analytics side, we've already identified a couple of different studies, right? The hypothesis is that 3 age buckets is not enough, that you want to break it out further. Or that you want to isolate for the elderly at 62 years old, because again, there's laws that protect the elderly from financial abuse. So maybe you want to do that, right? Maybe you want to know what habits lead to financial abuse. That's super helpful for most financial institutions, right? Because if you don't follow it, you get fined by the government. It's very serious penalties, right? So now you're talking about things that you can approach the business with, right? Okay, on the data science side, yeah, I wrote this wrong. Let me rewrite that. So here, coming back to one of the questions that was in the chat, Can we predict something? Yes, and we can. We can predict on who's better for retirement. There's a couple of personal attributes in here, right? We have the ages, we have the merit status, the income levels, things like that. Yes, that's very much a model we could develop to say, here's the factors that predict somebody who's going to be well prepared for retirement. And maybe self-employment is one of them, or maybe it's not. Maybe it doesn't have any effect, right? Not every factor has an effect. But we can find that via a data science approach, right? Now we're getting into the predictive side of things, right? We have our independent and dependent variables just from this data alone. So that's something we do in data science. The other one we talked about was around the marital status, right? So that would look like, so that's another item that we could do, right? And the reason you'll notice how I started that bullet point, because now you're saying, hey, is there a correlation to these other studies that are out there? Because other studies have shown that, right? They live longer, are happier, have more satisfaction in life, things like that, right? But that's not always a better financial situation. Maybe they're happier because they travel more. More travel doesn't always lead to more savings, right? Because you're spending all your money on the travel. So now you can say, we're going to do our own study, and then we're going to correlate it to these other external studies. Is there a relationship there? That's very valuable to do, right? So again, just applying the creativity, presenting the business with multiple options, and saying, here, we're the data science team. This is what we're capable of doing. Here's some ideas. What do you guys think? That meeting, that process that I just described, you're going to go through over and over again in your data science career. That's very common to do in your data science career. So again, we're setting up the framework here. And this exact slide, you could walk into a meeting with this slide and walk out with the projects that your team is going to do for like the next year, right? Well, some of these wouldn't take a year, but you could walk out of there with a direction for your team. So again, now you're teed up to actually execute code and execute some of the data science techniques that you've been learning. Okay? So Ravindran says, is it possible to change the values of numbers by the correct string value or category in a particular column? Yeah, sure, of course. Of course, that's a standard translation task. However, Ravindran, I don't know what kind of studies you've conducted before, but generally speaking, you wouldn't do that until some sort of visualization stage, right? During your modeling and your processing and all that, it's usually more convenient to keep things to their numerical value, their numerical representation. For any number of reasons, it's usually easier to do that. But certainly, definitely for the modeling phase, you want to keep it that way. So yeah, you could certainly do that, but it just depends on what phase of the life cycle you're in. We wouldn't want to necessarily do that, right off the bat and like drop the numerical values. But sure, it's possible to do that. Yeah. But again, now you're talking a little bit more about the execution. Where I really wanted to take us today was to take us to that edge and to be able to say, okay, yeah, I understand how a project comes together. Right, because again, that was my stated goal. Right, my stated goal was to get you to a point where you could like form your own project and say, yeah, now I'm ready. Now I have a direction. Now I know where I'm going. Right. So I think that accomplishes. I think we've accomplished the goals that I set out for this session. Right, because from here, like I said, now you're going to get into the coding and the execution side of it. Right, and I think that's a step too far for today's lesson. So what do you guys think? I'm ready to wrap this up. I think that we're teed up at a position where you're going to be ready and able to execute your own study, or at least think about studies in a different way, right? Because what I'd like to see all of you do going forward, spend more time reading the Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal, the news aggregators. Everything we did started started from us working, here well, actually, I think I took it down already, but it started with us working from Yahoo News, right? Just go to one of the aggregator sites and start reading. Start looking at the research that's being put out there, the press releases, and then dig a little further, and then get the raw data, and then get the data dictionary, and then look at the way they collected the data. Look at the different categories they use, the different demographics they have, the different regions they studied, right? When you're doing that, you're doing the work of a data scientist. You're mimicking the work that you're going to be doing in the future when you are employed as a data scientist. Okay? So that's really kind of where I want to leave you here today. That's really kind of the goal I wanted. And like I said, I'd love the feedback. Send me a direct message afterwards. My DMs on X and on Instagram are open. So feel free to send me some feedback. But, maybe I'll do these in the future or not. But this is kind of like the progression that I followed. So Tony says, extremely insightful. Thank you, Mr. Dennis. Well, thank you, Tony. I hope you did find it useful. I definitely feel I have the groundwork to start and conduct my own study. Great. Wonderful. And I hope you guys do that. I hope you guys can go out and say, and find your own way. I will be really disappointed if I start getting 100 questions on the FINRA study, because that's not the point. The point is to enable all of you to look for your own studies, to get your own data. I know I get viewers from all around the world, right? So maybe you want to find something that's more relevant to your region, to your country, to your personal interests, right? At the end of the day, data science, you have to be interested in what you're talking about, right? Ravindran says, if the corporate stakeholders know what they want, so we need to solve what they need, will that be affected to find some more insights they didn't ask, or we need to follow what they say? Oh, absolutely. Always give your own view, your own input. Absolutely. Because your stakeholders are not always going to know what your team is capable of, right? One of the very first things that I do when I join a team, when I join a company, is I want to know how educated the stakeholders are. And you might have to take the time to say, hi, I'm Dennis and I lead our data science team, and I'd like to sit down with you to let you know what we can do and what we can't do. What is a data science team? What is data science in general? What is a good data science idea versus what is a terrible data science idea? You might have to take the time to educate them on that. So yeah, Ravindran, when you're talking about this scenario and they're giving you their data, they might not know what's possible with their data. So sure, of course you want to meet their needs, but don't be afraid to also say, hey, by the way, the data you gave us also let us do this, this, and this. So here's a sample of that result. Are you interested in this? That's totally fine to have that discussion, Ravindran. So thanks for the question. Tony says, can we start a data science community like on FB or something? Tony, that's a great question. Tony also says, I would like to connect and network with other students. Tony, that's a great question. I have toyed with the idea of starting a Discord server. I like the way Discord builds communities. I actually have one ready to go. I've just never really advertised that out. So I don't know. If you guys are interested in that, let me know. And if there's, because my fear is that I wouldn't be able to answer every single message. I want it to be more like the community helping the community. But let me know what you guys think of that. If there is an interest, I'll send out the Discord invites. But it is something I've thought about. And like I said, I have a server 100% ready to go. I just haven't, really advertised it out. But let me know, Tony. My goal is to keep on publishing on Instagram, keep on publishing on social media, maybe keep on doing more of these sessions, because I really like the live streams. The live streams are fun for me. So, it's certainly much more fun than me sitting down and recording some like Python tutorial. I'm never going to do that. But yeah, so give me some feedback. Let me know, but I'll consider doing that. Kevin says, it would be great if we could go over another study together, or if you have documented any personal study of your own. Kevin, this is it. I did something very similar to this. I'm giving you pages out of my own playbook. I mean, this is what I did. I mean, when I tell you that I went to the coffee shop for like months on end, this is exactly the type of work I was doing. And like I told you, for me, I was interested in the people that couldn't come up with the emergency money. So I came up with my own predictive model for the emergency money. Like what are some of the things that cause somebody to reach that stage where they can't come up with money? Like that's fascinating to me. So that's what I did, right? So, Yeah, Tony, or not Tony. I think it was Kevin. So Kevin, yeah, this is what I did. I'm giving you pages out of my own playbook. This is what I did when I did my own study. And again, nobody was paying me for it. I didn't have interviews lined up. I didn't have anything. I just had the passion for data science and the recognition that, hey, maybe I need to improve my resume. I need to improve my skills, right? I didn't have the technical skills yet. I hadn't put in the hours, right? I hadn't mastered the hours. So again, read Mastery by Robert Greene and pursue this as your profession, as your mastering, because that's what I did. Let's see. So Ravindran says, "Sir, you don't have to answer all the questions. Other students are there to share their knowledge." Okay, well, thank you for that. Yeah, maybe I'll consider starting that Discord. We'll see. We'll see. Like I said, for me, I like this stuff a little bit more. But we'll see. Tony says, "I think it's a good idea because we can not only ask you questions, but also help each other and bounce ideas off each other." Okay. Share studies, knowledge, method of thought, etc. Okay. I'll consider it. I appreciate that feedback. Really valuable, guys. Okay, so I'm going to have a last call for questions here. But I am intending to close this out. We've been going for 2 hours, so thank you so much for you guys hanging in there with me. I think some of you have been with me from the start, so thank you so much for that. But I am intending to wrap up here. We've had some great viewership. A lot of people have seen this stream, which I'm really happy with. Please subscribe and like my YouTube. It really helps the channel grow. I'm trying to put out as much content as possible. And, I've only been at this since May. I'm still a new content creator, so I'm going to make mistakes. So if you guys have any feedback for me, let me know. But last call for questions here, guys. Karthi says, "Thank you for sharing your way of doing it, Dennis. It'll be great if we have a server to get this group of people here together. We can try doing a project with this group as we learn from you." Yeah, maybe. I've thought about doing that, like guided projects. But, there's a lot of aspects to that. What happens if somebody joins the project late, so on and so forth. So some of that stuff is interesting. Other parts of it don't interest me as much, but we'll see. Leonardo says, "I had to leave due to work, but I'll rewatch it tonight." Yeah, absolutely, Leo. The replay will be available fairly quickly. Like I said, YouTube does some processing or whatever, and then I also post my own clips. You'll see the clips go out on Instagram over the next week, because I queue those up. But yeah, there will be a replay available. Feel free to refer back to these. But yeah, I hope it's been helpful. But really appreciate all of you hanging in with me. Feel free to follow my Instagram, X. I'm on all the major social media platforms. Please click on like. But I appreciate your time. Please stay safe out there. I know all of you are from many parts of the world, so please stay safe. Take care of yourselves. Take care of your families. And I'll see you next time.